Hello and welcome to Decks Done Right TCG. Today, the Deck Doctor is in to help people understand what might be better in modern blue-white X control decks. Jace, the Mind Sculptor, or Teferi, Hero Dominaria. So comparing the two, now if you may have seen my review of Dominaria, I wasn't sure whether or not Teferi was good enough for Modern. Definitely was convinced that it was going to be fantastic for Standard. That still stands. But Modern, it's looking like, the more I've thought about it, the more I've evaluated the card, the more it feels like that Teferi is better than Jace. So we're going to break down the reasons why. So first off, the plus is better for Teferi because you get to leave up 2 mana at the end of your turn and draw the card. Comparing that to Jace's plus, which puts Jace at doing something that he might not want to do. So let me explain that further. So when you plus Teferi, not only are you not worried about being bolted or whatever, which is the reason why we're going to talk about Jace's plus in a second, but having the 2 mana up means that you can protect him with a counter spell of some sort, probably Logic Knot or what have you. But it allows you to have the ability to hold up answers in your hand while still being able to draw cards. Whereas Jace's Fate Seal ability, his plus ability, is generally used to end the game, or get to the point where you can end the game. But the problem is because red runs so many decks are running red for Lightning Bolt. Even Just Guy Control is running red for Lightning Bolt and Lightning Helix. That if you just play Jace and Brainstorm and you don't have open mana up, then he can just get bolted, and therefore, nothing really happened. Like, you filtered cards possibly, or if you had a fetch open, you could perfect Brainstorm, if you will. But if you just brainstormed and you had only 2 cards to begin with in your hand, you drew 3 cards and you had those cards. It is card quality. It does add to card quality. But if you're tapped out, or if you have only 1 open mana left, then you're looking at something that is not going to get you to where you need to be. Fate sealing your opponent is the point in which you've already turned the corner. Now, if you get to play Jace on 4, and you get to automatically fate seal your opponent because they're stuck on lands where they've been either flooded out or don't have enough lands, and you start fate sealing them, then sure. But that, you've already kind of won that game anyways. Control is about trying to turn the corner. The whole purpose of Control is to get to a point where you can turn the corner and continue to win the game. So if opponent is mana screwed or mana flooded, you've already pretty much won that game, because then you could just fate seal from that point. But in any normal circumstance, when the other opponent does have cards they can play in their hand or such like that, then Fate Sealing, isn't necessarily a great option. Okay. Now, with regards to the 0 ability for Jace, the Brainstorm, it's great if Bolt isn't being played, but the problem is Bolt is played and at a high frequency. And so you might say, well, Jace is great in Legacy. Well, yeah, but the removal of choice in Legacy is Swords to Plowshares. So that is not like, yes, Bolt is ran, but the ratio of Bolt versus Swords to Plowshares is way higher on Swords to Plowshares. So what you're looking at is the fact that in Modern specifically, Bolt is ran at a higher frequency, and therefore Jace could just easily die if he doesn't plus. If he just brainstorms, then yeah, you may have filtered your cards a little bit and gotten better card quality in your hand, but if you just paid 4 mana to brainstorm, like, that's pretty bad. It's a bad rate. So that in itself goes to state that the 0 ability, while it is pretty good as an overall ability, it's not necessarily always the ability that you want to play being tapped out. So the minus ability, okay? The minus ability for both is their protect abilities, okay? So Jace's is just a -1, and that only bounces creatures to your opponent's hand. Whereas Teferi's minus ability, even though it is more, I believe it's 3, even though it is more taxing on the loyalty, its effect is infinitely better. So the reason behind that is because it puts it into the deck. And it's not only the top of the deck, but 3 into the deck. And why that's important is because fetch lands are ubiquitous in Modern. Whenever you put something into the deck, they have to be mindful that they don't shuffle that away if they really needed that card by fetching. Also, comparatively speaking, whenever you have Jace's minus versus Teferi's minus on a haste creature, let's just say Hazard, for instance. Well, Jace can bounce a Hazard, but then that Hazard just comes down and bashes him in the face again and kills him. There's also, Bloodbraid Elf. Bloodbraid Elf is ran everywhere. It's even ran in Elves. People are starting playing in Elves a lot and making Jund Elves because, it's an Elf that does work too. So, they already splashed black for the Shaman of the Pack, but adding red was not that big of a deal either. So Bloodbraid Elf is ran in that, it's ran in Jund, Ponza, there's so many decks that are running Bloodbraid Elf, and that was kind of Jace's nemesis back in the day too. But that's just, bouncing a Bloodbraid Elf is just terrible because they're going to get the Cascade ability again. So that's not profitable for you there either. Whereas Teferi puts it back into the deck, and therefore you're not having to worry about that problem. Another relevant thing that Teferi has is it's any non-land permanent, which means you can deal with opposing planeswalkers, enchantments or artifacts that are a pain to prevent you from whatever you're doing. It covers a wider base obviously because it deals with more than just creatures, so it covers a wider base of answers, and it also stalls it for an even longer period of time. So the main thing that it comes down to in conclusion is that Teferi can be played at 5 mana. Okay, so it can be windmill slammed on 5 mana for the most part, unless your opponent has a crazy board control or a crazy board presence. But if you remember correctly, we're playing Wraths at 4, right? If we're playing Control, we're playing Wraths at 4, so there should be very little to anything on the turn 5 that when you play. So if the sequencing goes correctly, on turn 4 you Wrath the board, turn 5 you either plus them to leave up 2 mana to deal with something, or be prepared rather to deal with something, or you play him and you minus whatever your opponent was able to play the next turn, and you still go on about your business. So you can pretty much windmill slam Teferi on turn 5, no problem. Jace, on the other hand, again, we're looking at turn 4, right? That's the turn that he's technically able to be played on, is turn 4, because he's 4 mana planeswalker. So turn 4, you are tapping out, so that means you're not able to do anything to respond to your opponent. And if you plus, if you Fate Seal, then you may be able to get him out of bolt range, but then you didn't necessarily, like, you're not necessarily turning the corner unless they are, like I said before, mana screwed or mana flooded. Or you brainstorm on 4, so then he could still get bolted. All right, so that's not that great. So then let's look at turn 5 when you've got another mana open. Well, there aren't really that many 1 mana counter spells, especially in the main deck. You have Spell Snare, but then that's a really narrow counter spell. You're countering a 2 mana counter spell. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to cover, any amount of answers. So you're looking at, theoretically, playing Jace on 6 mana available, so you can have Logic Knot open to be in that same scenario, where you're not worried about necessarily Jace dying upon him coming in the board and doing his effect. So ultimately, I think that Jace brings to the table something that Control already had. Jace is a fantastic finisher. And it gets around decks that play stuff like Ensnaring Bridge, because the previous finishers for Control were Celestial Colonnade and Gideon Jura, which I believe those still will be. Celestial Colonnade is never going anywhere. That card's just insane. That's a fantastic finisher. But Jace didn't ever really help the deck turn the corner. And that's the thing about Jace inherently, is that his abilities don't help you turn the corner. Giving you better card quality can be argued that, yeah, it does help you get to a point where you can possibly, it gives you more answers, what have you. But again, Bolt is ran so much that a lot of times you have to plus to get him out of Bolt range. So the Fate's ability is an ability that allows you to end the game. And again, we don't need that. Control needs the ability to turn the corner. It needs to be able to get to a point where it can turn the game to the end game. Jace is great at doing that against something like a ensnaring. I said ensnaring bridge deck, but like something like a Lantern Control. That a brainstorm at that point is fantastic because it gets beyond the lock of them being able to pull, because one of the weaknesses of the deck is being able to draw multiple cards. So the brainstorm ability in that against that deck is insane. But that's not the only deck that's running Ensnaring Bridge. There's quite a few other decks that are running Ensnaring Bridge, like Free Run Red, for instance, and that sort of deck. So Jace is fantastic against those decks because at that point you're not worried about winning through beating down. You're just winning by ulting Jace. So in every other instance, though, Gideon Juro, Gideon was highly underrated, I think, for a while too. But it also does help you stabilize the board in that, you plus and make them attack Gideon, which puts Gideon at 8 loyalty. So unless they've got some big creatures already on board, which they might not, especially since it's at 4, it's at 5, and you could have possibly played a Wrath at 4. You plus Gideon, now they're one or two guys that they may have been able to play the next turn. They have to attack Gideon the following turn. It's a way to again help you get to the point where you can turn the corner. And then Gideon himself was also great because then you can turn them into a creature and bash their face after you've controlled them out of the game. So yeah, in short, is Jace a powerful card? Yes, Jace is a powerful card, no doubt. But is he better than Teferi in Modern? Blue, White, X control decks? I think the answer is no. And if you think that they don't go, they very well could go in the same deck, but I think that you're gonna want maybe a split of like 2 Teferi, 1 Jace, and it's possible that Jace doesn't even necessarily go into the main. That it very well could go into the side. I don't know, but I think overall the goal of a control deck is to get to the point where you can turn the corner, and that's where Teferi shines. So if you have any questions or want me to go further into depth, I think I did a pretty good job, but if you have any other further questions about it, let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to answer those as soon as I can. Thanks guys for watching.